Hello and welcome to my fireside chat series regarding ethical violations in forensic psychology. And oh my goodness, are there a lot of them? The three primary ethical violations in forensic psychology are 2.01 boundaries of competence. They don't know the knowledge that they are required to know. Standard 2.04, bases for scientific and professional judgments. Because they don't know the knowledge, they don't apply the knowledge because they don't know it. So they're in violation of 2.04, bases for scientific and professional judgments. And because they don't know or apply the established knowledge, they are then in violation of standard 9.01, bases for assessment. Now, there's all sorts of other ethical violations and concerns surrounding their practice, including Principle D justice, a basic principle of ethical practice. They're in violation of that. Denial of equal access and equal quality in the services they provide. They're in violation of 2.03, maintaining competence, 3.04, avoiding harm. So there's a number of violations involved in the situation. And because of that, my ethical obligations are active under standards 1.04 and 1.05 of the APA Ethics Code for doing something about encountering ethical violations in other forensic psychologists. I'm required by the APA Ethics Code to do things. I'm doing them, but the APA isn't responsive. I told the APA they have ethical violations over here, but they're not following up. So I fulfilled my obligation. It's to them, and so ask them, why aren't they fulfilling their obligations? And the standard 1.05 says that one of the things I should be doing is telling you folks to maybe file licensing board complaints against these psychologists for violations of 2.01, 2.04, 9.01, and a slew of other failure and duty to protect. That's my ethical obligation under 1.05. So I start filing licensing board complaints. Licensing boards aren't going to do anything because they are corrupted at this point with the influence of forensic psychologists. The clinical psychology side is not. Clinical psychology side of licensing boards are fine. It's the forensic psychologists who are corrupting the system and disabling the licensing board oversight system by exempting forensic psychologists from ethical standards of practice. And it's any case of court involved concern gets shifted over to review by another forensic psychologist. And so they're allowed to self review, and that's going to be a real problem. All licensing boards should be clear of forensic psychologists because I know for a fact all forensic psychologists are in violation of 2.01 and 2.04. So they're all unethical. They should not be sitting on licensing boards if they are unethical for themselves because they're reviewing people who are unethical and doing the same thing they do. So the competence standards come down to 9.01. And so this is the one in testimony or in malpractice lawsuits or about board complaints. This is the one that hits their reports. That basis for assessment. That psychologists base the opinions contained in their recommendations, reports, and diagnostic or evaluative statements, including forensic testimony. Now let's stop there for a second. So they pretty much include everything. They're saying psychologists base their opinion in everything, including forensic testimony. So they use the word forensic. So they're including the forensic psychologists on this, and they said diagnostic or evaluative statements. So they're not going to argue with forensic people. I don't diagnose. You're making an evaluative statement. So that first clause directly applies to all the forensic psychologists. Now, if I'm cross-examining this, if I was an attorney in my fantasy world cross-examining the mental health custody report or the forensic psychology, I would say, please read standard 9.01 of the APA Ethics Code. Do you agree with that standard? Do you abide by that standard? Why is that standard important? Okay. And so I get them to tell you why this is important. So that they base their recommendations, reports, diagnostic findings, including forensic, on information and techniques sufficient to substantiate their findings. What would happen, doctor, if a psychologist did not base their opinions and recommendations on information and techniques sufficient to substantiate their findings? Get them to explain why this is an important standard. And then the information is standard 2.04. Okay, so let's run back for a second. So so 2.04, the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline. So that's 2.04, established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline. So that's the information sufficient to substantiate their findings. If they did not apply this established knowledge, then their recommendations and reports are not based on sufficient information sufficient to substantiate their findings. They're just made up personal opinions. So, and notice, and sufficient to notice this in particular, they, in the parentheses, see also standard 2.04, bases for scientific and professional judgments. So 9.01 cites directly back to 2.04. This is what the APA Ethics Committee, in developing their ethical standards, this is what they want psychologists to do, apply 2.04. So I go through in my reviews of these custody evaluations, I go through line by line and provide my opinion from clinical psychology or apply the knowledge from clinical psychology to the information that's being reported. And when I'm done, I complete a diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting that looks at 6 domains of applied knowledge, so attachment, family systems, complex trauma, child development, looks at 6 domains of knowledge, including diagnosis, practice, domains of diagnosis and treatment planning. Check, 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 check. Were any of these elements apparent in the report? No. Well, then their opinions, as contained in their recommendations, reports, diagnostic and evaluative statements, including forensic testimony, are not based on information sufficient to substantiate their findings. Now, the pathology of concern is a shared persecutory delusion. The assessment for a persecutory delusion is a mental status exam of thought and perception. I'll cite to Martin. And so that's the techniques. So the information is standard 2.04. The techniques is a mental status exam of thought and perception. Are they based on? No. So they're in violation of both aspects of that ethical requirement. It's not based on information sufficient to substantiate their, and it's not based on techniques sufficient to substantiate their findings. So they are in violation of 2.01. You can get that off their Vita. They're in violation of 9.01, or 2.04, and you can get that off their report. And because of that, they're in violation of 9.01. That's your trifecta. That's your triad. And every single forensic custody evaluation will be vulnerable to that triad there, and looking at their Vita. One of the things I'm intending to do is a Vita series of just taking a look at everybody's Vita. And that's primarily for the benefit of family law attorneys on how do you cross-examine mental health testimony. And one of the ways is to look at the ethical standards of practice landing on 9.01. So, do you have them read standard 9.01? Do you agree with standard 9.01? Do you abide by standard 9.01? And why is standard 9.01 important? Tell me, doctor, I noticed that it cites specifically over to standard 2.04. Why would they do that? Why is it important in the basis of assessment to apply the established scientific and professional knowledge of the discipline? Get them to hang themselves on that. Get them to explain why that's important. Then you go, is attachment within the domains, the established domains of professional knowledge? Is family systems within the established scientific and professional knowledge? Are personality disorders, or complex traumas, child development, or delusional thought disorders um, within the domain of established scientific and professional knowledge? Yes, yes, yes. Where in your report did you apply that knowledge of any of these? Show me. Show me where in your report you discuss the attachment pathology. Show me where in your report you discuss the cross-generational coalition emotional cutoff. What is a cross-generational emotional cutoff, doctor? Where did you describe the possibility of a shared persecutory delusion and possible child abuse? Where did you discuss the possible child abuse? Well, I don't diagnose pathology. Well, if you don't diagnose, then how do you know what you're treating? So so there could be possible child abuse in this family. Did you do a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse? So is it possible there's a persecutory delusion you didn't assess for? Is it possible it's here? And if there is a shared, would that possibly be psychological child abuse? Psychologists are scared little bunnies. Okay, so we avoid the extremes. If you use always or never, we go, oh, no, I don't, always or never. We like this middle kind of mushy area. If you use maybe or possibly, is it possible there's child psychological abuse? The psychologist will think that's a safe answer. Well, yeah, it's possible. When you get them that if you get them that far to say, yeah, it's possible that there's a delusional disorder. Yeah, it's possible there's child psychological abuse. If you get that statement out of them, they're dead in the water, because then you say, you have a duty to protect obligation? Did you conduct a proper risk assessment for? So it's possible there's child abuse, but you didn't. Would you recommend that we get an assessment for child abuse? We get a proper assessment for possible psychological child abuse? And that's the one that's really the killer for them. Because if they say yes to that they recommend that we get an assessment for possible child. So you mean after your 9-month forensic evaluation, where you met with everybody in the family, cost the whole family, $30,000 to get this assessment over 9 months, and we still need another assessment for child abuse for possible? You didn't even conduct an assessment for child abuse in 9 months when the differential diagnosis is child abuse by the one parent or the other, because that's the only thing that causes attachment pathology. Holy Toledo. They're just exploiting these families for their money, and it's just they lazy, ignorant, incompetent. And I go back to this again and again and again. I should not be educating these lazy, ignorant, incompetent forensic psychologists about their professional obligations. I'm looking at multiple, what is that, 3, 6, 9 ethical violations by forensic psychologists. Where are the licensing boards? Where is the AFCC? Where is the APA? I may talk about this in the future. I good students. I like mentoring. And so I've wonderful graduate research projects around my work. Once I'm out of here and leave the planet, graduate students can start to go through my work and develop research projects on things. But one of the things I would suggest is you look at the AFCC conference presentations and do a content analysis on the topics that they presented at the AFCC. And I would start with a little pilot program just to orient me. And I go to 3 conferences like in the early 2000s, 2003, 2005, 2007, something like that. And I would just do a rough content analysis, begin to categorize the topics that they were discussing into sort of categories. That would be my pilot program. Then I would take those categories and I would apply those categories to 3 conferences more recently, like 2018, 2020, and 2022, and see what those topics are they presenting on those topics. Add additional topics if they're coming in. But then I would also look for topics on delusional thought disorders, topics on ethical violations, topics on attachment pathology, and see if they've had topics on child abuse and complex trauma, and see if they have had any. It's a delusional thought disorder, so are they talking about delusional thought disorder? Family systems, cross-generational coalition, emotional cutoff. Are they discussing family systems pathology? So I do a content analysis with the diagnostic checklist for pathogenic parenting. So it's up on my website. I think it's in the attorney resource section, where I basically categorize them into 6 domains and say, was any of these 6 domains evident in the report? And I get very specific. I even anchor it on specific constructs. So we're very clear as to what I'm looking for in my content analysis of their reports to say whether or not they used any of these domains. Let me shift over that. Oh, there we go. Any of these domains of knowledge. Now, one of the things, Dorsey Pruder, who conducts a custody resolution method, already has data taggers. That might be something she might want to do someday, is just send one of her taggers to start tagging the AFCC conventions for the topics that they discuss. Are they discussing any of the actual knowledge, or are they just making stuff up? I think that would be pretty interesting. But the AFCC is absolutely failing in their obligation to their psychologists. They are a professional organization with the attorneys. And so the attorneys are going to be cross-examining the forensic psychologists who are in the AFCC. That's going to be kind of interesting, kind of what's happening as I'm teaching the attorneys, family law attorneys, how to go after the license of the person sitting in the chair next to you at the convention. Okay. The APA. Okay, so I have ethical obligations under, going back, under standard 1.05. In other words, I have to take further action appropriate to the situation. Such action might include referral to state or national committee on professional ethics, licensing boards, or appropriate institutional authorities. APA is an appropriate institutional authority. I hand-delivered a petition to the APA informing them of the ethical violations. What did they do with that? Who did they give it to? What is their response? What is their response to this? Nobody's giving an answer. The forensic psychologists are stonewalling, the APA is stonewalling, and the licensing boards are simply covering up. They're the ones that are responsible for this. The licensing boards are the ones that are responsible for this situation. Where are they? Nowhere to be seen. And so that's the system's failure here. And the system's failure because specific people are in positions of authority, and they are forensic psychology people, and they are disabling the mental health response to this pathology. We need to end forensic psychology in the family courts and get clinical psychology to come back. Clinical psychologists will not come back. I would recommend that they don't come back. So family courts have no psychologists because it's too professionally dangerous right now to work in the family courts. I should not have to put my license on the line. Get a pilot program for the family courts to develop the diagnostic assessment protocol and the treatment protocol and the legal arguments that support that, so that a forensic psychologist trained in DBT can come into the family courts, conduct a particular structured format for the diagnostic assessment to return an accurate diagnosis. I suggest all assessments for possible child abuse contain consultation. That consultation is how we improve the diagnosis, the boundaries of competence. Consultation is how we improve the quality of mental health services, or all medical services. So boundaries of competence, consultation, boundaries of competence, consultation, boundaries of competence, consultation. So it doesn't have to be with me. Just pair up, get 3 of them. That's fine. We have the internet. We have the ability to do this. This is going to be a disputed diagnosis in the family courts. That's a fact. The appellate system for a disputed diagnosis is second opinion. Let's get the second opinion right up front. Doctors do that all the time. Doctor, this hurts. Let's get an orthopedic consult. With this particular pathology, possible shared persecutory delusion, possible child abuse, the court needs to rely on the diagnosis that's being provided. When child abuse is a considered diagnosis, our diagnosis has to be accurate 100% of the time. And so we need to be doing whatever we need to do to make sure that that happens and that the court can rely on the recommendations and the diagnosis that's coming out of professional psychology. So with that, those are the foundational ethical violations within forensic psychology. I would fire all forensic psychologists. The longer you've worked in the family courts, the more unethical you have been. So you're big puffy Vita. I've been here for 20 years doing this. Well, then you've been practicing beyond the boundaries of competence and unethical for 20 years. I don't want unethical, ignorant, lazy humans working in the family courts. This is too important. We need our top people here, and the folks that are currently here are the bottom of the barrel. If you have to explain the pathology to them, they are the bottom of the barrel. So with that, good luck, everybody, and we'll talk to you later about